Well, welcome back all my vintage dirt bike fanatics, and thanks once again for your continuing support and for taking the time to subscribe to my internet YouTube channel here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, in this featured pictures slideshow, this is a machine I discovered quite a few years ago and have only just found it once again in my picture archives. So hope you'll stay with me for the next few minutes as we showcase Dave Ashworth's superb M.R.D 500 Jawa Special. Now, as you would expect, this lovely machine is not a bike that has come off the Jawa production line back in the day, but is a very unique one-off special built by Dave Ashworth, who lives near Bolton in the UK. Now, if we start with the frame now, the frame is a very special design made by metal shaping genius Mark Janik of Mojo Motorcycles. Now, Mark used to work for the late Pat French at M.R.D, which of course is an abbreviation for Model, Replica and Design. Now, M.R.D back in the day actually specialised in the construction of aircraft models. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, a friend of the late Pat French had in his possession the original jig to make these M.R.D frames, and Dave Ashworth then asked if it would be possible to get one more of these frames made, whereby permission was then granted, and Mark Janik completed this bespoke chassis for Dave Ashworth, which of course was then chrome plated. But now that Dave had a chassis for his brand new M.R.D project, he also needed, of course, a power unit. Now, Dave originally purchased a CCM long stroke motor from an internet site to use in his M.R.D frame, although when his friend turned up at the seller's home to pick up the CCM motor, he also found out that the seller had for sale a Jawa 500 Peter Collins World Speedway motor for sale. Now, naturally, Dave was never going to pass up the opportunity of buying such a motor that had a bit of history behind it, so he immediately instructed his friend to buy the Jawa motor on the spot, as he was then going to use this engine in his brand new project. Now, when Dave stripped the Jawa motor, he found it had a polished and ported cylinder head, plus there were a few other trick upgrades on the machine, and it was just perfect to fit into the brand new Mojo M.R.D frame. Now, the engine is a 500cc high compression motor which obviously runs on methanol. Now, the compression is so high on this motor that Dave uses a spacing washer to stop the spark plug from hitting the top of the piston. The tolerances on this motor are just that tight. Now, the magneto has been converted to a generator or self-generating interspan system. Now, the motor has a different crank from the original to make the engine a bit more lively, although most of the other internals on this big Jawa motor are basically stock items. But as you can see, this 500cc motor fits the Mark Janik frame perfectly. Now, a standard 4-speed gearbox on this engine, although it has a specially fabricated reverse cam plate which makes it shift like a modern bike, with first gear down and the remaining 3 gears up instead of the opposite configuration of the original Jawa gearboxes. Now, of course, no wet clutches on these big 500cc Jawa singles. A dry clutch on this bike does exactly the same job as a wet clutch, although they do tend to be a lot more noisier than the standard wet multi-plate affairs. Now, an external oil pump on these big 500 Jawa motors. You can just see the little oil pump bolted onto the right hand side of the casing there. Now, this superbly crafted alloy fuel tank was actually hand built by PJ Tanks from Dartford in the UK. Now, this tank was built by Dave simply making a phone call to PJ Tanks, followed by a photo of what Dave actually required, and after an initial deposit was paid, just 4 days later this beautiful tank was ready for collection. Now, the M.R.D. Jawa graphics on the tank are all Dave's own handiwork. But as you can see, it looks absolutely superb in this Mark Janik frame, and the tank, having only taken 4 days to construct, says volumes for PJ Tanks in Dartford. Now, the alloy seat base and the bike's side panels were again made by frame builder Mark Janik, and the seat foam and its bespoke cover certainly add to the overall look of this wonderful machine. And I must say, it certainly looks like a nice place to lay your backside on if you are riding this wonderful little motorcycle. Now, when it comes to the rear suspension on this bike, I'm not entirely sure as to the manufacturer of these suspension units, although they do look to me like they are a pair of those classic Olin rear suspension units, which of course are excellent quality and look absolutely perfect fitted to Dave's M.R.D. Jawa. And of course, in this shot you also get a good view of those aluminium side panels that were of course made by the bike's frame builder Mark Janik. Now, the front suspension on Dave's bike are again a pair of Italian made Marzocchis, which of course are universally used on a multitude of classic and vintage dirt bikes. Now, they're not the best that money can buy, but if you do experiment with different internal springs and different weights of oil, these Marzocchi forks can be made to perform reasonably well, and that's hence the reason that many classic dirt bike builders use these Italian made front suspension units. Now, one of the more outstanding features of Dave's bike is the superbly crafted exhaust system. Now, to just run the pipe from the cylinder and then along the side of the motor would have been far too easy for Dave, so he decided to make a statement in that respect and do something really radical with the exhaust system. Now, Dave designed the route and loosely tacked up the pipe's design, although he then left the finishing welding to Rod Spry's engine expert Barry, who completed the finished article. Now, there is well over a metre of exhaust tubing on this exhaust system, with its various twists and turns and ins and outs, but it's certainly worth an award of its own for its radical design. Now, these pictures and a couple of video clips were taken at the concourse display at the 2015 Nostalgia Scramble, and you can see Dave's bike here being lined up for the judging competition, which of course it won the best in show. Now, back in the day, Pat French had only ever built a total of 8 of these M.R.Ds. Now, 6 of them had Jawa motors fitted, while only 2 had matchless engines in them. So as you can guess, it's not surprising you never see many of these machines at classic or vintage race events. Now, since building this bike, Dave has ridden the M.R.D. Jawa a few times at the red M.R.D. hill climb, and has even had a 23-second run recorded on the hill. Now, when you consider some of the quickest riders doing the red M.R.D. on that day also achieved under the 20-second mark, you can see that this bike is certainly not slow. Now, the bike's front and rear plastics are of course very good quality Preston Petty plastics, just as it was on the original M.R.Ds. Now, this bike's frame builder, Mark Janik of Mojo Motorcycles, who built this fantastic M.R.D. Jawa frame, also builds the frames for the JBR 500 Hondas that of course have that superb 4-stroke XR500 motor in them. But you have to admit, it's an absolutely stunning looking machine, and with only 8 of these special M.R.Ds ever made, you can see why there are not many of these raced at classic and vintage race events. So I hope you've enjoyed having a quick look at Dave Ashworth's M.R.D. 500 Jawa special, and don't forget, stay tuned and keep subscribing to my channel to see more of these extremely rare classic dirt bike machines. This video was brought to you in association with World Sport, the world's #1 supplier for all your off-road and leisure sportswear. Just visit their online website for more information.